He shielded the alien princess from a deadly blast but woke up surrounded by an entire alien throne. Part 1. The station smelled like copper and rain. Caleb Hart noticed that first, before the glass corridors, before the alien guards standing at every corner like decorative furniture, before any of the 12 things on his mental checklist. The smell. Copper and rain. He filed it away the way he filed everything, quietly, without comment, into the part of his brain that never stopped working even when the rest of him pretended to relax. He had been assigned to Verith Station as a diplomatic escort. Low level. Ceremonial. The kind of posting they gave to soldiers who were good enough to not embarrass the species but not important enough to matter. Admiral Finch had handed him the briefing tablet with the expression of a woman handing someone a mop and calling it an opportunity. He had said, "Fine," and packed his bag. The station was neutral ground, one of those rare places in the known galaxy where different governments agreed, in writing, to behave themselves. The Veiltheri Dominion had requested the summit. Humanity had agreed because saying no to the Veiltheri was the kind of thing that started problems no one had the budget for. Caleb's job was simple. Stand at the edge of rooms. Look capable. Touch nothing. He was good at looking capable. The first day, he mapped the station in his head. 3 main corridors, 2 service tunnels that nobody official was supposed to know about but that any grunt with eyes could find in an hour. 14 guards in visible rotation. Probably 6 more he couldn't see yet. He counted the cameras. He counted the exits. He ate something at dinner that tasted like lavender and sadness and told himself it was protein. The Veiltheri staff moved around him like water around a stone. Polite. Distant. They were tall people, most of them over 2 meters, with skin that shifted color slightly depending on their mood, like a mood ring but attached to an actual living being. Caleb found it useful. Hard to lie when your skin announces your feelings. He spent the evening in his assigned quarters, reading the cultural briefing he'd already read twice on the transport ship, and going to sleep at exactly the hour his body told him to. The gala was on the second night. Someone had turned the main hall into something out of a dream. The ceiling was open to space, actual space, through some kind of transparent material that held the vacuum out while letting the stars in. The light came from floating structures that had no visible power source. The tables were low, the chairs were alien, and there were about 200 beings in the room from at least 9 different species, all dressed in things that cost more than Caleb's yearly salary. He stood at his post near the eastern wall, hands loose at his sides, and did what he always did. He watched. The Veiltheri delegation arrived precisely on time, which he respected. They moved in formation, guards first, then advisors, then the nobles, and then, at the center of it all, like the eye of something very calm and very dangerous, the princess. His brain dropped everything it was holding. He picked it back up in about 1.5 seconds, which he considered a reasonable recovery time, and went back to watching the room. Her name was Seraphine Vale. He had read about her in the briefing. Crown Princess. First in line for the Veiltheri throne. Educated on 3 different worlds. Spoke 6 languages. Had survived 2 political assassination attempts before the age of 24, which the briefing mentioned in the same flat tone it used to list her academic credentials, like it was all the same category of achievement. She moved through the room like she had been taught exactly how to do it since before she could walk. Which, probably, she had. The gala progressed. Toasts were made. Food was served that Caleb mostly didn't touch because he was working, and also because it still tasted like lavender. High Consul Vathan took the floor for a formal address, an older Veiltheri, all gold collar and smooth words, the kind of man who smiled at you while doing his math. Caleb watched him the way he watched everything. Then the gift drone entered the room. It came in through the ceremonial entrance, which was correct and expected. Gift presentation was part of the formal agenda, Caleb had read that too. A small drone, carrying a decorative offering from the High Consul to the crown. Standard. Approved. On the schedule. He clocked the energy signature 3 seconds before anything happened. Not from the drone itself. From something inside it. A reading his body recognized before his mind finished the calculation, the particular way the air changes right before something in a room is about to go very wrong. 3 seconds. He was already moving. Not toward an exit. Not toward cover. toward her. It was not a decision he made with the thinking part of his brain. It was the other part, the older, faster part, the part that had been trained and broken and rebuilt until it did things like this automatically, without asking permission from the rest of him. He crossed the floor in 2 seconds. People turned. Someone shouted something in Veil Theory he didn't have a translation for. He got one arm around the princess and pivoted hard, putting his back between her and the drone, and then the world turned white and very loud and then not loud at all. He remembered the impact. His back. The floor rising to meet him. He didn't remember hitting it. The thing about getting hit by a blast wave is that it's not like in the films. There's no floating, no slow motion, no moment of peaceful clarity. There's just a before and an after, and the after starts in the middle of something, in the middle of a ceiling you don't recognize, a pain that sits in the lower half of your spine like a fist that hasn't decided to open yet, and a sound that might be voices or might just be the particular ringing that replaces all other sound when your ears have had enough. Something was being said. He couldn't make out the words. His translator was lagging, the impact had knocked something loose, or maybe it was just his brain taking its time coming back online. He lay on his back on a floor that was cooler than the one in the gala hall, and stared at a ceiling he didn't recognize, and waited for the rest of the information to catch up. Someone was close. He could hear breathing. He tried to say something and what came out was not a word. The voice spoke again, closer now, clearer now, in a language his translator was just barely starting to process. The words came through like a signal through static, piece by piece, until they arranged themselves into something he could almost hold. He couldn't tell yet what they meant. He filed that away too, into the part of his brain that never stopped working, and let the ceiling be the only thing he had to deal with for right now. That was enough. That was plenty. He shielded the alien princess from a deadly blast but woke up surrounded by an entire alien throne. Part 2. The ceiling was painted in stars. Not decoratively. Not loosely. Someone had mapped actual star systems across the surface of it in fine silver lines, connecting them the way old sailors used to connect constellations, with intention, with story, with the belief that if you named something in the sky it became a little less frightening. Caleb stared at it for a long time before he was sure he was actually awake. Then he moved his arm and remembered his back, and the question of whether he was awake got answered very definitively. The room was not a hospital. It had the smell of one, something clean and sharp underneath everything else, but everything else was stone that wasn't stone, carved and polished into a chamber that felt less like medical care and more like a room where important things were decided. There were 4 guards. He counted them before he sat up. All of them Veil Theory, all of them in the dark uniform of the royal house, all of them very pointedly not looking at him. Seraphine Veil was sitting 3 feet from his bed. She was not sitting the way you sit when you are keeping a polite vigil. She was sitting the way you sit when you have been there for a while and have run out of things to do with your hands and have decided that stillness is the only dignified option. There was a tension in her jaw that she was controlling very carefully. Her skin, which the briefing had told him shifted with mood, was holding its neutral gray-blue the way someone holds their breath. He looked at her. She looked at him. He said, "Water." She turned and said something to an attendant so fast and so precisely that the attendant was gone before Caleb had finished processing that there had been an attendant. Not sharp, efficient. The kind of efficient that came from a lifetime of having a voice that people listened to without needing to be told twice. He revised the assumptions he had formed in the gala hall. She was not fragile. She was managed. There was a difference. The water arrived. It tasted like actual water, which he appreciated more than he expected to. Admiral Finch's face appeared on a comm screen built into the far wall. She looked at him the way she looked at things she had not authorized but could not undo, with the particular expression of a woman doing very fast math and not liking the sum. "Hard," she said. "Admiral. You're aware of what you did." "I'm aware of most of it." "The parts you're not aware of," she said, "are the problem." She paused. The Veil Theory have a law. Old law. When a person physically places themselves between the crown and a threat, knowingly or not, it creates what they call a shield bond. It's reciprocal. Formal. The throne cannot simply thank you and send you home. That would be an insult to the bond, and insulting the bond is the same, legally, as insulting the crown. He held the cup of water and thought about that. So what does that mean? He asked. It means, Finch said, that you are currently the official shieldbound of Princess Seraphine Vale of the Veiltheri Dominion, and you will remain so until the bond is formally dissolved, which requires the agreement of the throne, the princess, and about 14 other parties I am currently learning the names of. He looked at the ceiling. Fine, he said. Finch closed the channel with the expression of a woman who had expected exactly that response and was choosing not to have feelings about it. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Commander Dex Orin walked in. Caleb had not yet met Dex Orin in person, but he recognized the type immediately. Royal Guard Captain. Big. Deliberate. Carried himself like every step was a statement. His skin was a darker shade than most of the Veiltheri Caleb had seen, and it was currently holding a very steady, very controlled brown that the briefing materials had not covered but that Caleb's general understanding of living creatures translated as, I have decided to be professional about this but I want you to know it is a decision I am actively making. Orin looked at Caleb the way a guard dog looks at someone new in the house. Not hostile. Not friendly. Measuring. Caleb looked back. Orin said something to the princess in Veiltheri, keeping his voice low. Seraphine responded in the same register. Then Orin turned and walked to the far corner of the room, positioning himself between Caleb and the door, which was either standard procedure or a message or both. Seraphine dismissed the attendants. She did not dismiss the guards. She also did not dismiss Caleb, which, given that it was his room, said something. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she asked, flat and direct, with the translator rendering it in plain words that had clearly lost some of their original formality, why did you do it? He thought about the question. You were standing in the wrong place, he said. She was quiet for a beat. So were you. He didn't have an answer for that, so he didn't give one. She didn't seem to need it. She stood, the kind of standing up that closed the subject, and walked to the door. Orin fell into step half a pace behind her, not quite looking at Caleb, not quite looking away. At the threshold she paused. She did not turn. She said one thing in Veiltheri and the door closed behind her. His translator offered him nothing. Too short, too fast, or too idiomatic. He lay back and looked at the ceiling. The star maps went on and on above him, silver on pale stone, connecting system to system with careful lines. He followed them with his eyes the way you follow a map when you're not sure yet where you are on it. His gaze stopped at one cluster near the upper edge of the ceiling, over the northeast corner of the room. It was formatted differently from the others. Smaller text. A different kind of line connecting the stars. But the arrangement was unmistakable. He had looked at that star system from the other side his whole life. Someone had put Earth on the ceiling deliberately. Not as a footnote. Not as a curiosity. As something that was meant to be found. He stared at it for a long time. He didn't know what to do with it. So he did what he did with most things that didn't have an obvious answer, he filed it in the back of his mind, closed his eyes, and let the silence of the stone room settle around him. Tomorrow there would be more to figure out. There always was. He shielded the alien princess from a deadly blast but woke up surrounded by an entire alien throne. Part 3. The palace had been built to impress. Caleb appreciated that the way he appreciated weather, noted it, accounted for it, and then got on with things. His formal title was Shieldbound, which meant he had quarters inside the royal wing, access to most of the palace's interior corridors, and absolutely no privacy from the 300 or so people who lived and worked here and who had apparently decided that watching him was the most interesting thing happening in the Dominion this season. They were not rude about it. The Veiltheri court did not seem to do anything overtly. They observed him the way you observe a new piece of furniture you're not yet sure fits the room, noting his movements, his habits, the way he carried himself, cataloging each small thing with quiet, thorough attention. He let them look. On the first day, he walked every corridor he was allowed to enter, and a few he wasn't sure about, until he had the layout of the place in his head well enough to navigate it in the dark. On the second day, he introduced himself to the kitchen staff, the groundskeepers, and the 3 attendants whose job seemed to be to appear wherever he needed something before he asked for it. On the third day, he fixed a ventilation cover in the eastern corridor that had been rattling loose from its housing, because the sound was annoying and apparently no one else had thought to deal with it. A palace administrator found him doing it and stood at the end of the corridor for about 40 seconds without saying anything before walking away. He filed that under things he had done that confused people and went back to work. Seraphine watched him. Not directly, she was too disciplined for that, but in the way powerful people watch things they're uncertain about, with the part of their attention they can afford to spare, from a distance that gives them room to revise their opinion without anyone noticing. He caught it occasionally. Turned corners to find her already looking somewhere else. Noticed that she knew where he was in the palace at most given times without anyone obviously reporting to her. He found it more interesting than uncomfortable. She had spent her entire life being the most observed person in every room. He imagined it was strange for her to be on the other side of it. He didn't say that. He didn't say most things. That was one of the useful things about him. The court tried to engage him. A few of the younger nobles made attempts at conversation that started formally and got increasingly uncomfortable when he answered their careful, probing questions with straightforward, unguarded answers. They were looking for maneuvering. He gave them information instead. They didn't know what to do with it, which was fine. Dex Oren remained difficult. Not hostile, Oren was too professional for open hostility. But he stationed himself in rooms slightly before Caleb arrived, left slightly after Caleb left, and kept himself positioned between Caleb and Seraphine with the consistency of a man who had decided something and was going to keep deciding it regardless of external input. Caleb understood it. He didn't resent it. If their positions were reversed he'd have done the same. He also noticed that Oren was watching him the way a guard watches a threat, not the way a guard watches a fool. That was its own kind of respect. The night of the 11th day, Caleb couldn't sleep. This was not unusual. He went to the eastern corridor because it was quiet and far from the residential wing and because the ventilation worked correctly now and the air was good. He sat down against the wall with his jacket off and started rewrapping the bandage on his lower left side, where the blast had done the most interesting damage, which was healing but slowly and with commentary. He heard footsteps. Not guard footsteps, he knew those by now, the particular rhythm of the night rotation. These were quieter. More deliberate. Seraphine came around the corner and stopped when she saw him. She was not in her formal clothes. She was in something simpler and darker, her hair down, and she looked younger than she did in the throne room and also more tired, in the way that people look when they have stopped performing for the night and have forgotten that someone might still be watching. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she walked across the corridor and sat down against the opposite wall, which was not something he had expected. She looked at his hands working the bandage. He kept going. There was no point in pretending he hadn't been doing it. After a while she moved forward, carefully, slowly, and reached out and touched the edge of the bandage. Not to take over. Just to check it. Her fingers were light and practiced, and she pulled them back after 2 seconds and settled back against the wall. "You didn't have to," she said. Her translator had gotten better at rendering her voice. He could hear something in it now that the formal version didn't have. Something that had been held very carefully for a long time. "I know," he said. 4 seconds of silence. Neither of them moved. He kept his eyes on the bandage. She kept her eyes on some point on the floor between them. The ventilation hummed softly in the walls. Somewhere deep in the palace a clock marked the hour with a sound like a low bell. Then she said, "Does it hurt?" "Less than it did," he said. Which was true. "That is not the same as no," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." She didn't say anything else for a while. He finished with the bandage and put his jacket back on, slowly, because rushing would have announced something he wasn't ready to announce. Then he told her about Vathan. Not everything. He had been watching the High Council for 11 days and what he had seen was a man who smiled at all the right moments and whose skin never changed color the way the other Veiltharies did. Either Vathan had extraordinary self-control or the ability to shift color had been trained out of him so completely that even his involuntary responses had learned to stay still. Either way, it was the tell. A tell that big, held that consistently, meant work. It meant effort. It meant there was something under it worth hiding. Seraphine listened without expression. When he finished she said, "I know." Flat. Tired in a way that was older than the rest of her. "How long?" he asked. She looked at him. "Since I was 17, she said. And then she stood up, which closed that part of the conversation the way closing a door closes it, completely, without discussion. He didn't push. He filed it in the back of his mind next to the star map on the ceiling and let it sit. She walked to the end of the corridor and paused without turning. "The vent rattling was annoying me," she said. I did not know how to say so without it becoming a formal complaint. He looked at the vent cover. "I could have told someone," she added. "But you didn't," he said. "No," she said. She turned the corner. He sat in the quiet corridor with the correctly installed vent and the low sound of the palace settling around him, and he thought about all the things that had just been said in the spaces between what was said. Then he went to find Finch's channel and told her the old man in the gold collar was the problem. Finch said, "I know. Don't touch it." He said, "Fine." He didn't touch it. He did, however, start paying attention in a different way entirely. He shielded the alien princess from a deadly blast but woke up surrounded by an entire alien throne. Part 4. The Grand Convocation Hall was built for moments like this. Caleb could tell by the way the acoustics worked, every word spoken at the center floor carried to every corner of the room with equal clarity, which meant everyone heard everything and no one could pretend otherwise. The seats were tiered in a wide circle around the floor, and the Veiltheri nobles filled them in order of rank, their formal clothes layered and precise, their expressions arranged into the particular kind of careful blankness that meant everyone in the room was doing a great deal of thinking and showing none of it. Seraphine sat at the head of the floor in a chair that was not quite a throne but functioned as one. Straight-backed. Still. Her face was the face she wore when she was in public, which was a different face than the one she wore in the eastern corridor at 3 in the morning. Caleb had been watching long enough to tell the difference. He was in the gallery above. Observer's level. He was not supposed to speak. High Consul Vathan took the floor. He was elegant about it. That was the thing about Vathan, everything he did was elegant, measured, packaged in the kind of language that sounded like reason and smelled like something else. He spoke about tradition. He spoke about the integrity of the Veiltheri crown. He spoke, with great apparent reluctance, about the matter of the shield bond. The shield bond, Vathan said, was a sacred institution. A noble one. And it was precisely because of its nobility that the convocation had an obligation to ensure it was honored correctly. Correctly meaning, and here the smiling paused just briefly, just barely, by someone qualified to hold it. Someone Veiltheri. Someone whose standing in the Dominion was not in question. A non-Veiltheri shield bond, he continued, was not only unprecedented. It was, under a proper reading of the original covenant, invalid. And if it was invalid, then the princess was, legally, unprotected. And if she was unprotected, then the matter of her security, and her political future, required immediate resolution. He happened to have a proposal. A betrothal arrangement. A noble house with strong ties to the convocation, impeccable lineage, and a deep commitment to the stability of the Dominion. He presented it the way you present something that was decided before the meeting started. The room was very quiet. Seraphine was very still. Caleb looked at her face from the gallery and saw the thing she was not showing anyone, not fear, not anger. Just a tiredness so deep it had stopped having a bottom. She had known this was coming. She had probably known it was coming since she was 17. The math had always been going to add up to this room. He looked at Vathan. Vathan's skin was perfectly still. No color shift. No tell. The effort it took to maintain that, even in a room this charged, was extraordinary. The speaker of the convocation opened the floor for response. One of the princess's advisors began to speak. Carefully. Technically. Navigating the legal framework with the precision of someone who had been preparing for this argument and was executing the prepared version of it. Caleb had been studying Veiltheri law for 2 weeks. He had started the day after the corridor conversation. Not because Finch told him to. Not because it was his job. Because the math kept adding up to one answer and he was the kind of person who prepared for answers. He had found something. Not in the current law. In the original covenant, the founding document of the shield bond institution itself. Older than anything Vathan had cited. Older than the convocation's current procedural framework. A provision that had not been removed, only buried, which was not the same as gone. He leaned forward in the gallery. The advisor's argument was correct but insufficient. It was defending the current framework against Vathan's attack on it. What it wasn't doing was going deeper than the framework, to the thing underneath that Vathan's argument couldn't reach. He said, "I'd like to speak." The gallery went very still. Several dozen Veiltheri faces turned toward him with expressions that ranged from offended to genuinely startled. The speaker looked up with an expression that was trying to determine which procedural rule applied to this situation and finding the search difficult. Seraphine did not turn. But something in her posture shifted. The smallest possible shift. Caleb spoke from where he was. He did not raise his voice. The acoustics did the work. He said 3 things. He named the original covenant. He cited the specific provision. He explained, in plain language, what it said, that the shield bond's validity was not determined by the species of the shield holder, but by the nature of the act that created it. Intent. Physical placement. The willingness to receive the harm. Those were the 3 criteria, and all 3 had been met, and the founding document made no further qualification. He then said that if the High Consul wished to challenge the founding document of the institution he was claiming to defend, he was welcome to do that. But that was a different argument than the one he had been making. And the convocation would need to decide which one he was actually making. 3 sentences. 19 seconds of actual speaking. The room was quiet in a different way than before. Vathan's skin, for just a moment, half a second, maybe less, shifted. A brief darkening across the jaw. Gone almost before it was there. Caleb caught it. He filed it. The convocation did not vote in his favor. They were not charmed. They were not grateful. What they were was legally outmaneuvered, and they were old enough and formal enough that the procedure mattered to them more than the outcome in this particular moment, because procedure was the thing that kept all of them safe. They tabled the motion. Pending review of the cited provision. Vathan smiled at the floor. His smile said, "This is not over." Caleb, from the gallery, smiled back. His smile said, "I know." He became aware of Dex Orin at some point during the silence that followed. The guard captain had been at the corridor entrance, as usual, but he had moved. Slightly. Without announcing it. He was now positioned a half-step closer to Caleb's side of the room than he had been before. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. The session ended. The nobles filed out with the careful, unhurried movement of people who had a great deal to discuss privately. Caleb came down from the gallery and stood at the edge of the main floor. Seraphine walked past him without stopping. But she spoke. Quietly. 2 words in Veiltheri, low enough that only he was close enough to hear. His translator caught it as sound but not meaning. Too idiomatic. Too old. That night, in his quarters, he pulled up the language archive and spent 40 minutes tracing the phrase through older forms of the language, through 3 different regional dialects, through a shift in meaning that had happened sometime in the last 2 centuries. He found it. He read it twice. He sat with it for a long time. The formal register she had used was one reserved, in every context he could find, for addressing an equal. Not a servant. Not an ally. Not even a friend in the way the Veiltheri used that word. An equal. He closed the archive. Outside his window, the Veiltheri night was deep and violet and full of stars, and somewhere in the palace Vathan was having a private meeting with people Caleb had not yet identified, and the math was still adding up, and he had 2 weeks of work left to do before the answer was ready. He got started. He shielded the alien princess from a deadly blast but woke up surrounded by an entire alien throne. Part 5. The observation deck was open to the sky. It sat at the highest point of the royal palace, above the towers and the long silver rooflines, above the carved stone and the deep corridors and the carefully maintained distance of the court below. The sky up here was violet at night, a deep, bruised violet that Caleb had not seen in any sky on any world he had been to before this one, and which he had stopped trying to find a comparison for because there wasn't one. He was there because the math had finally added up. He had spent 2 weeks after the convocation session watching, counting, and connecting. Vathan's meetings, held in rooms that were swept for listening devices on a Veiltheri standard schedule, which was a schedule Caleb had now memorized. The movement of 3 specific members of Vathan's staff in the days following the tabled motion. A security rotation change in the lower palace that had been filed as routine maintenance. None of it was routine. Separately, each piece was nothing. Together, they pointed at one night, one location, one window of time when the Royal Guard rotation left a 4-minute gap in coverage of the upper levels. Tonight. The observation deck. Sometime in the next hour. Finch did not know he was up here. He had considered telling her and decided the call would take longer than the window he had. He stood in the dark near the railing and waited with the particular patience of someone who has learned that waiting is a skill and not an absence of action. The door behind him opened. It was not Seraphine. He handled the next 40 seconds efficiently and without any of the drama that films like to attach to moments like this. There were 2 of them, not Vaeltheri, hired, which made sense because Vathan was careful and fingerprints mattered. They were professionals. So was he. The difference was that he had been expecting them and they had been expecting an empty observation deck, and in that gap lived the entire outcome. 40 seconds. Then it was quiet. He was standing at the railing, breathing steadily, when he heard footsteps on the stairs. Dex Oren came through the door first. He took in the observation deck in one long sweep, and then he looked at Caleb, and then he looked at the rest of the situation, and he was quiet for a very long time. Other guards came through behind him. They moved efficiently to handle what needed handling. Oren walked to where Caleb stood. "You knew," Oren said. "Not a question." "I counted things," Caleb said. Another silence. Oren looked at the railing. At the violet sky. His skin had shifted to a color Caleb hadn't seen on him before, a deep, warm tone, not the controlled professional brown of their earlier interactions. "You move fast," Oren said, "for a human." "Hell of a thing to notice," Caleb said. Something crossed Oren's face. It was not a smile, exactly. It was the thing that lives near where a smile would be on someone who has decided to respect something they were prepared to disrespect. Then Seraphine came through the door. She was alone, or she had been, until her guards appeared 2 steps behind her, which was close enough to alone for someone who was never actually alone. She crossed the threshold and stopped. Took in the deck. The guards. The situation. She looked at Caleb. He was tired. He was standing because sitting would have announced something, and the lower half of his back had been filing complaints for the last 20 minutes, and he was looking at her with the expression of a man who has done a thing and is not yet sure what comes next. She crossed the deck. Not quickly. Not dramatically. At exactly the pace of someone who has made a decision and is not in a hurry because the decision is already made and the hurry is irrelevant. She stopped 2 feet in front of him. "You planned for this," she said. "The math pointed here. You could have told someone. It would have taken longer than the window." She looked at him for a moment. He could see the thing she was doing, not reading him for hidden meaning, but reading him the way she read the convocation chamber. Finding the thing that was actually there. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "Less than last time," he said. "That is still not no." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she turned to face the court. Some of them had followed her up, advisors, senior nobles, Oren standing slightly to the left and not pretending not to listen. The violet sky above all of them, wide and deep and full of things with no names in any human language. She spoke in Vaeltheri. Formal, precise, the register of official declaration. His translator caught most of it, a formal address to the court, an account of what had occurred tonight, the naming of Vathan's involvement with a directness that left no diplomatic space around it. And then she said something that changed the texture of the room. He caught the first part, a formal rite, ancient by the sound of the phrasing, something the translator was working hard to keep up with. A declaration of bond. A declaration of recognition. He caught his own name in the middle of it. The court was very still. Even the wind had gone quiet, or seemed to have, which was probably his imagination. She turned back to him. "I should have asked first," she said. In plain language. Direct. He looked at her. At the court behind her. At Oren, who was looking at the sky with the expression of a man deciding something for the last time. At the violet above all of them, the particular bruised color of this sky on this world, which he had stopped trying to find a comparison for. You could have asked, he said. Yeah. I am asking, she said. Now. The court waited. The sky waited. He thought about the star map on the hospital ceiling. His star in the corner, placed there deliberately. He thought about a woman sitting 3 feet from his bed because she had been there a while. He thought about a corridor at 3 in the morning, a bandage, 4 seconds of silence, and a phrase in Old Veil Theory that meant something no one had said to her in a formal register in a very long time. He thought about the thing she had said. An equal. Finch's voice came into his earpiece. Small and tinny and 3 seconds behind everything. Heart. Report. He reached up and clicked the channel closed. He looked at Seraphine. He said yes. In Veil Theory. 3 syllables, badly pronounced, with the accent sitting in exactly the wrong place. Something happened to her face. Not the face she wore in the throne room. Not the face from the corridor. Something he had not seen before, a thing that arrived quietly and changed everything about the way she was standing, the way the light caught her, the way the violet sky seemed to settle into the background like a painting that had just found its subject. She had not smiled publicly in a long time. The court would discuss this later, in private rooms, with the careful language of people who had witnessed something they were not sure they had permission to talk about directly. They would disagree about what it meant. They would offer interpretations and qualifications and contextual readings. They were all going to be slightly wrong. He knew what it meant. She knew. That was enough. That was plenty.